So this is a really quick flyover of European history, at least the first couple thousand years. All right, so we're going to go back to 900 BC. So this is about 3,000 years ago. That's 150 generations back, give or take, like your great 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 times 150 grandparents' time. And at this point, humans have been living in Europe for about 10,000 years, and during that time, distinctive groups have begun to emerge. They have different facial features, different languages, different customs. They're definitely not countries yet. Tribes would probably be a better word. And there aren't any major cities yet in Europe. All that stuff's happening right now in what's modern day Iraq, the Fertile Crescent, the Sumerians and Babylonians. But groups like the Greeks, the Etruscans, the Celts, Slavs, Basques, Magyars, and Scythians are using bronze tools and weapons. They're hunting, they're farming, and they're fighting each other off and on. All right, so zoom ahead, 900 to 290 BC. So early on in this period, the Greeks are becoming the dominant force in Europe, both in terms of their military power and in terms of their cultural sophistication. So that means they're inventing things like democracy and also slavery, kind of a weird combination, that are both going to become super important later on in European history. And also lots of the key elements of the kinds of poetry and art and math and architecture and storytelling and philosophy that even today we think of as Western or European thought. So for a while, Greece is set up as a bunch of city-states, which are exactly what it sounds like. Cities that are kind of like their own little country, or kind of like modern-day American states, where they cooperate at some points, they fight each other at other points. But under this guy called Alexander the Great, all of these city-states are united, conquered, and then united. And the Greek Empire starts to spread, and Alexander conquers parts of the Persian Empire, which is under the rule of the Persians, who are the people who today we would call Iranians, and their empire includes modern-day Turkey, Iran, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, the Middle East. There have been some movies made about these epic wars between the Persians and the Greeks. After the death of Alexander, the Greeks start to decline, but their neighbors to the left, the Romans over there in the boot, have been kind of following along what the Greeks are doing. They've started to worship their gods with different names, and they're stealing a lot of their best ideas. They're ready to step in and kind of fill the power vacuum now that Greek civilization is declining. And do they ever? So from 290 BC to 235 AD, that's our next map. This is really the peak of the Roman Empire. So during this 500-year period, the Roman Empire grows to become by far the biggest, most powerful, and arguably the most advanced society in the world so far. At its peak, Rome conquered most of what we now think of as Europe, including modern England, and large chunks of North Africa and the modern Middle East. And by doing this, it spread its culture and its technology, which included things like roads and aqueducts, as well as things like taxes and laws, all over Europe, all the places it conquered. Because the Roman style of conquering people was basically that they would whoop you on the battlefield because they had superior military technology and tactics. But then they would kind of turn around and invite you to join their empire and pretty much let you as a conquered people keep on doing your thing. Retain your own culture with a couple adjustments. You had to pay your taxes, and you had to learn to speak Latin because that was the language that business was done in. And in return, you get to be part of the Roman Empire, which was like the best thing going, the best quality of life. And as a result, all these various peoples that they conquered began to speak a mix of Latin and their own local languages, which is where we get the so-called Romance languages. Spanish, Italian, French, Portuguese, and Romanian are the most famous of the five. That's where they come from. Another important thing that happens around this time is that sometime in the year right around 33 AD, give or take 10 years, a Jew named Jesus of Nazareth is executed by being crucified, being hung to death on a cross by Roman soldiers, basically for being a rabble-rouser, for kind of challenging the authority of the Roman Empire, with this kind of radical new religious philosophy that he's preaching. And after his death, over the next couple hundred years after that, his followers, who come to be called Christians because he became known as Jesus Christ, the Messiah, are persecuted by the Romans. But this new religion, which is radical in the sense that it preaches that, quote, the poor shall inherit the earth, which was very different from the other religious philosophies of the time that basically said, the king is the king and the poor are his subjects, and that's the way it is. Christianity really appeals to the masses in the Roman Empire, and it grows in popularity. And that popularity, as you might have heard, continues, becomes kind of a big deal a little bit later on. Actually, it becomes a pretty big deal right away, because in 312, the Roman Emperor Constantine converts to Christianity after supposedly this thing where he prays to the God of the Christians before a big battle, just kind of like almost like a bet with God, just to see what happens. And he wins the battle and converts that night. At least that's how the story goes. So soon after this, Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire, kind of like Latin is the official language of the Roman Empire. And the city that Constantine builds and names after himself, Constantinople, modern Istanbul, Turkey, kind of becomes the unofficial capital of the eastern half of the Roman Empire. Rome is still the capital, but it's kind of like New York and LA, the two most important cities. But the Roman Empire in this period of time from 235 to 490 AD, after the birth of Jesus Christ, the supposed time of his birth, Rome starts to have problems. They have corrupt politics. They have a bad economy. They're kind of over-consuming their resources. People are suffering from high taxes because they have to pay for these wars to expand the empire. And there's a lot of inequality, and certain groups are being persecuted. Slaves, Jews, people who aren't rich, non-Christians. And then add to that the thought that these people who the Romans think of as, quote, barbarians, these are the Germanic tribes up here in modern-day Germany and Scandinavia. So these are people like the Visigoths and the Vandals and the Ostrogoths and the Angles and the Saxons and the Huns. Great, scary names. So these quote-unquote barbarian tribes are starting to kind of chip away at the borders of the empire. So Rome has a real problem, and in 476 AD, the city of Rome is conquered and sacked by the Vandals, which gives us that word that we use today for people who break windows and draw dirty pictures on bathroom walls. So this is often referred to as the fall of Rome, although that's not really accurate, because the eastern half of the Roman Empire, which just kind of rebrands itself as the Byzantine Empire and keeps on going, doing Roman things, just not in Europe, over in Turkey and the Middle East. The Byzantine Empire will continue for another 1,000 years. So the fall of the Roman Empire is really only half accurate. It's just the half on the left, the European half. But the period that comes after is really important, and it's often referred to as the Dark Ages. Although, as we'll discuss in the next video, that's also controversial. All right, so we've just gone from before 900 BC, before the Greeks really rose to power, up through the end of the Roman Empire, at least the western half, the part that was centered in Rome, in 476. And we will pick up next time.